A state passed the most comprehensive AI hiring law in the country. Then it got gutted. In 2024, Colorado passed the most comprehensive law in the country regulating AI in hiring. Full risk assessments, ongoing monitoring, public disclosures. The kind of law that, if it worked, would have forced companies to prove their hiring algorithms weren't discriminating, not just promise it. It was scheduled to take effect on June 30th, 2026. It didn't happen. A federal court paused it weeks before the deadline. Then Colorado's own legislature gutted it, stripped out the monitoring requirements, stripped out the risk assessments, replaced the whole thing with a much thinner version that mostly just requires a notice. The new effective date, January 2027, if it survives that long. Here's the question worth sitting with before we go any further. What happened that made lawmakers blink? Was this regulatory overreach getting corrected? Or was it the moment we lost our best shot at actually checking whether the algorithm deciding who gets hired in this country is fair? To answer that, you need to understand what that algorithm actually is. Because it's not what you think. You've probably been told to optimize your resume for the ATS, the applicant tracking system. Keywords, formatting, no graphics. That advice is mostly outdated. The ATS in most companies is just a filing cabinet. It doesn't score you. The thing that might actually score you is something else entirely. A cognitive assessment platform. You play some games, you answer some questions. The system measures things like risk tolerance and processing speed. One company, Pymetrics, now owned by a firm called Harvard, built one of the most widely used versions of this. Here's the detail that matters most. Your score doesn't expire after one application. It gets stored. And if the next company you apply to also uses Pymetrics, you're not getting a second evaluation. You're getting the same score, reused, for up to 330 days, without anyone telling you that's what happened. Now hold on to that fact, because it's about to explain something that didn't make sense for years. In 2026, researchers from Stanford, Chapman, and Northeastern ran the largest empirical study of algorithmic hiring ever conducted. 3.4 million applicants, 4 million applications, 156 employers, almost all screened by that same Pymetrics system. Pymetrics had already checked its own data for bias. They pooled everything together, every employer, every job, and found nothing serious enough to flag. The Stanford team did something different. They broke the same data apart, position by position, not tech industry as a whole, each individual job separately. That's actually how federal anti-discrimination law is supposed to work. The EEOC's 4/5 rule is a per-position test, not an industry average test. When you look at it that way, the picture flips. About 1 in 10 individual positions showed adverse impact against Black applicants under that federal threshold. Nearly 26% of all applications submitted by Black candidates and close to 15% from Asian candidates were funneled toward exactly those positions. The bias didn't disappear when you zoomed out. It got buried. Now remember that 330-day score reuse from a few minutes ago. Here's where it becomes the most important number in this whole story. Because the same vendor was scoring candidates across so many different employers, the researchers found something they called systemic rejection. Get rejected by one Pymetrics screened employer, and you're significantly more likely to get rejected by the next one too. Not because you're a worse fit, but because it's the same underlying judgment, recycled. Among applicants who applied to 10 different jobs that all happened to use this vendor, 4% were rejected by every single one. To get the odds back down to something close to fair, a 99.9% chance that at least one employer says yes, researchers calculated you'd need to apply to roughly 25 positions. More than double what you'd need if every company were actually deciding independently. That's the cost of the monoculture in one number. Not bias exists somewhere. 25 applications instead of 10 to get the outcome you'd expect in a fair system. I want to be straight with you here, because the easy version of this video stops at outrage. The honest version doesn't. Companies using these tools aren't lying when they report real gains. A 2026 survey of HR professionals found a genuine, statistically significant improvement in hiring speed when companies adopt AI screening. Some companies that design these tools around explicit, narrow criteria have actually seen real diversity hiring gains, up to a 48% improvement in some cases, not despite the algorithm, but because a well-specified system can be more consistent than a tired recruiter skimming resumes at 5 p.m. Both of these things are true at once. The technology can genuinely speed up hiring and even improve fairness in some configurations. And when one company's blind spot gets adopted by 156 different employers, that same blind spot stops being one company's mistake and becomes a feature of the entire labor market, invisible to exactly the kind of aggregate check that's supposed to catch it. That's not a story about good technology versus bad technology. It's a story about what happens when one system's flaws get multiplied by scale instead of being caught by it. Which brings us back to Colorado. The Stanford researchers pointed out that even New York City's hiring bias audit law, the first one in the country, instructs auditors to check this stuff in aggregate, the exact method that hides the problem. Colorado's original law was actually built to dig deeper than that. Ongoing monitoring, real risk assessments, the kind of scrutiny that might have caught something like the Pymetrics pattern in real time for an entire state. Then a federal court froze it. Then a White House directive pushed states toward lighter, more uniform rules instead of state-by-state patchworks. Then Colorado's own legislature swapped the substantial version for a thin one, mostly notice requirements, no real monitoring, with an effective date pushed out to 2027. Meanwhile, the EU is moving the opposite direction, treating hiring algorithms as high-risk systems with real teeth. California and Illinois have their own partial rules. Nobody actually agrees yet on how seriously to take this. So here's where it actually leaves you, the person applying for jobs right now. Not with false comfort and not with despair, with one specific actionable fact. Assume your application is being scored by something more than a keyword scanner. Assume that score might outlive that one application, and know that the number of applications it takes to get a fair shot in at least some pipelines right now might genuinely be higher than you think. The algorithm deciding a meaningful share of who gets hired in this country was never properly audited at the level that actually matters. For one brief window, a law existed that might have forced that audit. Right now it doesn't. Drop a comment. Have you ever applied to multiple jobs and gotten rejected from all of them in a way that felt suspiciously identical? I want to know if this matches what you've actually experienced. Subscribe. I'll keep tracking what happens to Colorado's law, and to the next one.